has descended upon America. Organized crime is sweeping the nation, and hard-working citizens have become targets. And behind all this terror, gangsters.
Entertainment has evolved so much over the last century, it's almost hard to believe it. From the first time D.W. Griffith picked up a camera or Charlie Chaplin slipped on a bit of ice, or a train pulled into a station, to the big-budget computer graphic cutscene extravaganzas of today, the medium is barely even recognizable. Some of the old greats, like Martin Scorcese, have chosen to lament the loss of an artistic medium by saying, "I don't think Marvel movies are cinema. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. Nothing is at risk. The pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes." Martin received a lot of backlash for this from comic fans who grossly misunderstood what he was trying to say. I and a lot of other old-school gamers feel the same way about games. We've gotten to a point where games are simply one-button, dopamine-drip theme park attractions. Nothing is at risk, nothing is wagered, other than your bank account. The result was always going to be the same regardless of input. Todd Howard, on his recent appearance on the Lex Friedman podcast, said as much, stating, "So it's more like an amusement park. If you study, like, the design, our level designers do this. How do they build Disney World in these places?" And I literally can't think of a statement more offensive to my sensibilities when it comes to art. Scorsese continues, "Cinema was about revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. It was about characters, the complexity of people, and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical natures, the way they can hurt one another and love one another, and suddenly come face to face with themselves." This makes me think of Starfield, or Skyrim, or Fallout 4. What is the revelation there? What about the story, or the gameplay for that matter, made me confront myself? Film has a lot of strengths, and at times a good movie will force you to have an almost out-of-body experience, fully immersing you in its world and characters. By contrast, games immerse you kinetically. That moment where the keyboard is just an extension of yourself and you mentally enter the simulation, unaware of the passage of time. We've all been there, and that level of mental focus and engagement is what makes the medium wholly different from film. So why are we treating them the same way? Focusing on narrative and not function, fidelity and not playability. Who really cares why we need to save the princess when it's fun and engaging to save her? There has always been a disconnect between film and video games, and retro game designers understood what they couldn't deliver in the form of emotional attachment. They could provide instead an unparalleled breadth of options. Look at Daggerfall, for example. The story is basic. The Emperor sends you out by ship to a faraway land to investigate a disturbance and intercept a letter of a personal nature.
Of a sentimental and personal nature.
The story isn't what makes Daggerfall a good game. In fact, if anything, it detracts from the overall experience. The game is fun because of the journey, the size and scope of the world, all the places you can go, the dungeons you can get lost in, the enemies you battle, and the cities you visit. It doesn't need a compelling story because you, the player, are the writer of your own journey. If the main quest didn't exist, it would still be a good game that is just as interesting to play. And I think to myself, how could this be improved by a flimsy, forced narrative to save my dad?
Now go. Just leave me.
This is where game developers have lost the plot, pun fully intended. Films are already at a disadvantage to books, and in games, well, if you think the best way to tell a story is an open world, I know a Nigerian prince who would love to discuss an opportunity with you. This isn't to say that games should have no story, but they're not the best medium to push that story on the player when everyone is going to have radically different ideas about the tale they're personally telling. Instead of spending all this time on cutscenes and badly written, disjointed narratives, spend it on player freedom. This is what makes Dark Souls and Elden Ring so great. The lore is really deep and excellent, but you don't need to know the lore to have a good time. The story isn't pushed into your face like a noisy toddler looking for attention. When I discovered Gangsters Organized Crime, my head was full of all the movies that were relevant to my Italian heritage. Scarface, Goodfellas, Godfather, Casino. As a family, every weekend in '99 we would gather on the couch with a big bowl of popcorn and watch Tony Soprano on the screen. So long as I would close my eyes whenever he went to the Bing, of course. Martin Scorcese may be the king of film, but he doesn't understand games, which are better left far, far away from the clutches of writers, producers, and directors, and better served in the hands of those who both love and create them. Goodfellas wouldn't be as amazing as it was if it was made by committee. It was a singular vision that was realized by the labor of a group. It turns out this is how the best games were made. Daggerfall was the brainchild of Ted Peterson and Julian LeFay. Fable and Black and White were the realized vision of Peter Molyneux. And Metal Gear came from the single, brilliant mind of Hideo Kojima. Too many cooks will spoil the broth, and this is precisely the trap AAA gaming studios are falling into. A team of 10 people made Palworld. One person made Roller Coaster Tycoon, Stardew Valley, Minecraft, Braid, Manor Lords, Undertale, and RimWorld. This isn't even a comprehensive list, and the evidence is staggering. How would Stardew Valley be improved by a producer that doesn't even play games? What further input from a team of people could have made Braid a more personal and emotional experience? The industry was built off the backs of those that loved the thing that they were creating, and it is sustained by financial vampires more than willing to suck every last penny from the nostalgia in our veins. Hothouse Productions was established in 1996 by 3 people, Martin Carr, Rob Davies, and Peter Moreland. Martin Carr was the marketing director, Peter Moreland was the producer, and Rob Davies created the concept and the game's design. None of these folks have any game credits past their last game, Crime Life Gang Wars, in 2005, besides Martin Carr, who was a focus tester for Arma 3 and a marketing credit for the Nintendo DS game Salon Supervisor in 2009. The game was coded by Martin Kappel, who ended up at Ubisoft Sofia as the game director for Assassin's Creed Rogue and Origins, as well as the content director for Black Flag and various other projects with Fortnite creator Epic Games. Alistair Brimble does the sound effects. He has quite the resume, earning 467 credits across 231 games. He famously did the sound and music for Roller Coaster Tycoon Classic and 2, but he also did work on games like XCOM, Dungeon Master 2, Mortal Kombat 2, Alien Breed, and Need for Speed. The art was done by Andrew Gibbon, Jason Howard, and Steve Teague, all of which primarily did work for Hothouse and seem to have bowed out of the industry upon its closure. I love old school games primarily because most of them are very unique. It's not the same basic assets from whatever engine was available to everyone like today. These are built from the ground up. Each game sort of tries its own thing as folks worked out what the industry would turn into, and they took chances, and some of my favorite mechanics have all but disappeared from modern gaming. You can't find them anymore. I would challenge you to boot up the game and try to play it without instruction if you enjoy undue pain and frustration, but I will also include a link to the game's 104-page manual in the description. You're going to need it. Oh, you heard that right, a manual that you have to read, and it's 104 pages. There's not too many games that I can name made after 2010 that need more than a couple pages to explain, but in the before times, the games were so new, so foreign to the layman, so mechanically diverse and full of features, it would take a novella to teach the player how to play it. Today, we call that a barrier to entry. Back in the 90s, we called it a new experience and an opportunity to learn. I used to judge games based on how cool the manual was, and you'd commonly see a kid with the game open, waiting to be played, reading an actual book with pages and everything before he ever hit the power button. This was the analog version of watching a build guide on YouTube. Also commonly included in books like these was concept art and lore dumps about the characters and the world, as well as a notes section for writing down notes. I miss those days dearly. I was playing the GOG version, which did not work out of the box, unfortunately. This comment left on the store page is more than enough to get the game running in a few simple steps. You download the link, I've checked it out, it doesn't seem to contain any viruses or malware. You pop that in your installation folder. You want to use Windows plus R to bring up the prompt, then type in regedit and hit enter. Next, under the specified H key tab, scroll down to Gangsters EXE and double click. Then copy the paste in the provided code and you're good to go. Thank you, Victor Vasquez. You are a man among men. Now that we have the game running, let's go over gameplay. A word about random generation. Excellent. Every time you boot up a new game, the city of New Temperance will be different. The businesses will be in different places. You and your adversaries will have different territory, and a pool of 400 gangsters with random names and attributes will be added to the board. This feature makes the replayability endless. You're always going to get the same great experience, but with consistently revolving variables that will change the trajectory of that experience with each playthrough. This is a mechanic that was in vogue at the time, with titles like Daggerfall and others using it to perfection, but it wasn't present later on in Gangsters 2 or Casino Inc. This is a style best used on non-3D games, as you end up with large open spaces with nothing to do and repeated patterns. But in this context, it serves to make the game timeless. There are 3 win conditions in Gangsters. You can go the Lucky Luciano route and crush the competition. You can go the Whitey Bulger route and become loved by the community, eventually becoming mayor, or you can go the Joe Bonanno route, leave the life, and go straight altogether at the head of a legitimate empire. Winning a game of Gangsters isn't the fun part. Like many retro games, it's the breadth of options available to the player to arrive at that destination that makes it pop. Each randomly generated hood will have randomly generated stats as well, and it's helpful to put hoods with a capo that has like ability. Hoods with proficiency in intelligence and firearms should be your muscle. Use them to do patrols and get into trouble. High intimidation will help you with strong-arming your neighbors into paying protection. If they're a civilian, you can intimidate them. Your killers need other skills: stealth, arson, bombs, and knife. Your capo will deal with the underlings and assign the best mobster to the appropriate task. They are no pushovers, however, and if you're the type of boss that wants to eat alone, you're going to have a problem. The more money you make and the longer your guys are with you, maybe they want a larger take of the proceeds. Denying them proper payment could force an otherwise loyal ally to defect to one of your opponents. Some of them will even be dishonest, and your weekly report is showing some mysterious losses. Maybe one of your men is skimming from the top. You could fire him, but why give your enemy a powerful ally? You could kill him, and that will stop others from trying to cheat you, but maybe they'll start to feel like the same thing will happen to them, dropping their approval. If they're your capo, perhaps you demote them back to the general pool, but then you run the risk of an underling with a reason to hate you. This is the strength of Gangsters. You can choose to do nearly anything, and the game will have upsides and downsides as a result of the actions you chose. There are no quests, no objectives, just your imagination and the tools to realize your vision. In Gangsters, you play the boss. You don't have a character to direct on screen, you simply plan out your marching orders to your team and watch the results play out week by week. The first thing you should do is set up some protection rackets. Get a couple guys with high intimidation and send them over to rob the neighbors. This will not only generate income for you, it will expand the borders of your territory. Your less than ideal hoods can be assigned to a team of their own with the sole purpose of collecting protection money later on, so you should try and get as many soldiers as you can, if only to deny them to your opponents. Sometimes, just like the real mafia, your neighbors will refuse to pay and may need a little reminding of who the boss is. Maybe someone has moved in on your turf, or maybe the business owner doesn't think he has to pay. Disgraziata. Make sure you check your Rolodex in your weekly report to see if anyone didn't pay, and click the business to see if they've been taken over by a rival gang. If they have, hit them twice as hard and establish your hold on the area. If not, maybe you want to send a hood over there to talk to them and smooth things over. Should they tell you to get stuffed, next step is to send a knockaround guy to convince him in a different way. It's important to send them in unarmed, with a low knife but a high skill in fists. Otherwise, things might get out of hand and the store owner could die. Murder is a situation you had best avoid. This will send the police or the FBI to do an investigation, and once you're on their radar, they might take a look into your illegal businesses and warehouses. Don't kick the hornet's nest unless you're prepared for economic misfortune, and if you must whack somebody, try to do it far from home. The other bosses aren't the only thing you have to worry about, and your new life of crime will quickly accumulate the chagrin of the state and federal government. The tax man will come and collect his take on your laundered income, so it's best around week 3 to 5, send one of your guys out to nearby accountant's office and recruit an accountant. This pencil pusher will save you a lot of money and creatively structure your income to lose less of a percentage per week. The more you make, the more you'll be taxed, so you'll need to keep your accountant happy, as if he turns on you or gets arrested, he can turn your cooked books over to the Fed or switch gangs and give away your dearest secrets. Hoods with high intelligence, intimidation, and stealth can also do raids, but beware, you can also be raided by not only rival gangs but also dirty cops on the take. It's best to get them in your pocket first, and for that you'll need a lawyer. You can pay the cops off, but it's best to have them work for you, as raids and strong arms won't draw the attention of their fellow officers, as, just like real life, the good cops will look the other way to their co-workers' malfeasance. Once they're on the payroll, anything short of murder will be easy to do in your territory as long as the Fed doesn't get involved. Once you've queued up your actions and form your team, it's important to protect your territories. Some hoods will be left around your offices and businesses, while others should be sent out on patrol along your border. You can set their aggression level to high if you want to be no nonsense, but I wouldn't suggest it. If your patrols see enemy units walking around your neighborhood, they'll send you a notification. The work week is able to be paused, and you can click on the notification to warp to that area. Once there, you can direct your hoods to take out enemy gangsters or simply observe. Enemy hoods will be hungry to find your office, and once they do, you can expect their boss will make your life more difficult. You want to build toward the city center where the high-value buildings are and enforce your borders as soon as you can, and be sure to manage your relationship with rival gangs before starting the next week. As you can see, there are more options and choices packed into this experience than there are in 20 games that came out today. Hothouse would come out with 2 clones of Gangsters Organized Crime set in different periods. That would be Cutthroats, a high-seas swashbuckling management sim hybrid in the vein of Sid Meier's Pirates from 1987, which I will cover in a future review, and another title, Abomination, the Nemesis Project, a post-apocalyptic alien invasion real-time combat game in the vein of 1994's XCOM. These titles were bold in proposed function, but found lacking in execution, being somewhat unoptimized and prone to crashes and bugs. We are focusing on the studio's gangster-themed titles, as that's what I find interesting and unique, and the mechanics of Cutthroats and Abomination are better done elsewhere. The next year, Hothouse would completely debase themselves and their brand by making a slew of cash grab Who Wants to Be a Millionaire licensed titles in 2000, while the industry was putting out such titles as The Sims, Diablo 2, Baldur's Gate 2, Counter-Strike, Metal Gear Solid, Icewind Dale, and Hitman, codename 47. Making good games is fine, but making good games and putting them beside industry-defining titles that would build a legacy for the next few decades was the eventual downfall of Hothouse Creations. Gangsters 2 was one of my favorite games as a kid, but as an adult I can really see the downgrade in quality from its progenitor, Gangsters Organized Crime. In its place is a more streamlined and graphically impressive version of the formula. What it lacks in functionality it makes up for in character, and it's the type of game that is really hard to put down. You play as Joey Bain, a grieving son rising through the ranks of the Prohibition-era mafia to avenge the murder of his father by Ward, Bullseye, Coley, and his bosses that ordered it. Who Joey was before, or the tactics he's willing to use to achieve his goal, is completely up to you. The game takes a step-by-step approach, and at level 1, you're not presented with the same breadth of options as you will be a few levels in. Soon you'll be able to bribe cops, set up illegal businesses, have hideouts all over the city, do drive-bys, and most of the things you could do in the previous entry. The downside, however, is this experience will be mostly the same every time, as the game lacks the procedural generation from organized crime. This serves to make the city of New Temperance even more unique. Gone are the massive samey buildings with little to no hope of knowing where you are while viewing the street level. In its place are detailed but static maps, businesses, and enemies. This does in a lot of ways change the entire dynamic of the game. In Gangsters 2, more so in the later levels, there are a lot of ways to achieve the same goal, but it will always be the same goal. Level 1 will always be Joey and Lightning Landucci driving by in a coupe to take out Bullseye Coley. Comparatively, Gangsters OC will always be starting a new map with extortion and recruiting on week 1, but the gangsters, the map, the locations of enemies, and the businesses will be mostly different every time. This is in no way a criticism of Gangsters 2. The finished product is like the chef's kiss of strategy games. It mixes the freedom of titles like Cutthroats and OC, but blends it with the real-time combat they had developed in Abomination. Other games would try and capture this magic with entries such as Empire of Sin and Omerta City of Gangsters. Both titles are mostly okay, with Empire of Sin putting you in the role of greats like Al Capone and Meyer Lansky to take over the city of Chicago. Pitted against opposing crime lords, you can use your business acumen or a firm hand to rule the city. This is accompanied with frustrating and tedious XCOM-style combat, which mirrors the approach by Omerta's City of Gangsters. Omerta is a pretty good game, and in a lot of ways I would consider it to be the spiritual successor to Gangsters 2. I enjoyed my playthrough quite a bit, but again, the XCOM-style combat is done poorly and seems out of place where real-time combat would have made the game flow so much better. I may be buried in the ground before I ever get a true-to-form Gangsters organized crime clone, but a man can hope. While Gangsters 2 had less options than its predecessor, the ones on display were well developed and useful. You can have 8 different types of gangsters altogether. Combat and stealth are values that come with every unit. In addition, they may spawn as a fast driver, an explosive specialist, a sweet-talking charmer, an assassin, a kidnapper, a bank robber, a safecracker, and a spy. Gone are the accountants and lawyers. Simply send your charmer to the police to get them firmly in your pocket. Doesn't work on the FBI, however, because they are untouchable. Alright, I'll see myself out. Choices of weapons and vehicles have mostly stayed the same. You get shotguns, Thompsons, and dual pistols, as well as the roadsters, sedans, trucks, and armored vehicles you had gotten before. However, the only real option late game is Tommy guns and armored cars, making the choices kind of worthless to have. While it is cool to give an assassin a silenced pistol or a rifle and have him one-shot a level boss, it's also just as easy to send a group of 5 gangsters with automatic weapons and an armored car to clear out the whole group in one go. Combat is not a passive affair. You can click on an enemy and your hoods will automatically attack them, but this is wholly ineffective and you should be clicking on the nearest target while pausing the game between each downed enemy. Bombs are a boon in combat too. You can throw them into businesses and put them out of commission, but they are better served clearing out entrenched groups of enemies and bosses inside of offices and hideaways. This will turn the muscle into a pink mist, leaving only the head of the family to catch your fire in the streets. Most of your staff hires will come out of classified ads in the paper. For the youthful among us, we used to have these things called newspapers. Everyone would read them, and the classified section is where you would find jobs, or sell things, or announce the death of a family member. Here, apparently, hoods and specialists and hitman openly advertise their services, replacing the recruitment mechanic of the previous game. It's important to note that you can't arm hired muscle when you hire them directly to an owned business, and in later levels pistols will not be sufficient to stop an attack. It's also important to take note of which locations the computer regularly makes attempts on, because those are the only locations they will try to take over and are by extension the only locations you need to guard. Instead, hire a gangster, arm him, and send him to guard your exposed rackets with Tommy guns. A clever bomber will wipe out your muscle with one throw, so keep them on the street or in a parked car nearby. Eventually, you may even face off against the military. It's best to avoid them altogether, as they're not as useless as the police and FBI. They carry rifles, not pistols, and they have tanks that will obliterate your forces. Beat cops and feds, in spite of your mentor's advice, are more of an annoyance than a real threat, and can be killed indiscriminately with little to no real consequences. Gangsters 2 is sadly unable to be found via your normal online venues. You're going to have to hope for a disc version of this game because there's absolutely no way to get it otherwise. I am hoping that GOG will add the DRM-free version with the working cutscenes. I would also be remiss if I did not mention multiplayer, as this was an integral part of both experiences. Organized Crime had a slow burn LAN setup, but Gangsters 2 had full online capability powered by Gamespy. If you played games at all in the late 90s and early 2000s, you know about Gamespy, the anti-cheat hosting service for many of the experiences that fueled our childhood. Starting as a rudimentary lobby matching software for Quake, it would soon bleed into many other titles as their primary source of online play. With a 2023 Techspot article by Sami Haj Assad, which covered Mark Surface, Gamespy's creator, and the eventual downfall of the company, saying, "Gamespy did a lot that you take for granted now. Server browsing was the beginning. We created a technology division that became the back office for a lot of the game developers and publishers. No one wanted the responsibility for running multiplayer services for game long term, so we took it on. This service wouldn't just permeate the PC market, with Xbox and even Nintendo temporarily using Gamespy." Mark continues, "When the Xbox shipped, it had a network jack on it, but there was no way to use it to play games on the internet. You could hook up 2 Xboxes on your local network and play games together, but that was it. We had this super genius who, in a weekend, created and released an addition to Gamespy Arcade that let you play networked Xbox games over the internet. So we really were the first Xbox Live." It's hard to describe the feeling of seeing the familiar green man in his trench coat pop up on your screen screen as you loaded into a multiplayer lobby of your favorite game, and at the time, it might even be something we saw so often we stopped noticing it entirely. But the logo up on my screen is like seeing an old friend I've not visited it in some time. Not to say it always worked flawlessly, however, and there were some technical issues in such a rudimentary phase of the technology. The tale of Gamespy is the tale of much of the early independent tech companies. They were bought out by a mobile games company called Glue Mobile in 2012. The company decided to maximize profits and shut down a lot of the older games and their online functionality, enraging the gamers who played them. This left the market wide open for clients like Valve's new would-be juggernaut Steam, which would use what Glue considered worthless business to build an empire out of it. Glue eventually drowned in the ocean of their own ineptitude and was bought out by Electronic Arts in 2021. Some games would survive the leap, but Hothouse was dead and gone by that point, so Gangsters 2 disappeared from memory like tears in the rain. 2 years later, Hothouse will be coming back from another ill-advised bout of development, having made Sky Sports football quiz for publisher THQ. This is exactly as missable and lame as you're probably imagining. To be fair, they had the assets for a quiz-style game already from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire series, so it was likely a cheap production cost for a paycheck. Commonly, failing businesses will try things outside their expertise or comfort zone as they attempt to financially keep their heads above water. Whatever the case, they were quick to produce and push out Casino Inc., which dropped in 2003. It's important to remember that about this time and moving up to the early 2020s, game journalists would begin to prize accessibility over functionality. It didn't matter what the game did or if it was fresh, new, and exciting. Instead, things like user interface became a reason to give a bad review. There was an elitism at play there, and this shallow journalistic approach has eroded the core values of the gaming community for decades. In 2024, many game journalists would lose their jobs as the publications cut labor, losing eyeballs as they made articles about anything other than games and why we love them. Andrew Park from Gamespot proves his point by stating, "While the game offers a number of surprisingly complex ways to manage your casinos, the complexity doesn't really add depth, especially since the game's interface is clumsy and inadequate. As a result, Casino Inc. ends up being a game that's more complicated and less fun than it probably should have been." When I was a kid, admitting you weren't capable of figuring out a game or that it was too difficult for you to master was the biggest cell phone I can think of. You give me any piece of software in a couple hours, I can more or less figure out how to use it. I don't think controls and ease of play for a game are reasons to give it a low or high score. No more than the difficulty of chess is a reason to give it a low or a high score. It's entirely dependent upon learning the skill required to operate it. If a game no longer requires input, it's no longer a game. I find it a bit reductive to compare two unique works of art as better is entirely subjective. A Picasso and a Rembrandt can both be beautiful without needing to be compared, though they are both paintings. There is no reasonable argument to say that a game must have the same controls, the same UI, the same key mapping as a popular game to be good. I find that the copy-paste way games are made now is far inferior to the unique retro experiences I engage with. For example, Resident Evil, where the main character has the controls of a child wading through poured cement, but those seemingly bad systems and clunky AI add to the tension and atmosphere and wholly amplify the level of horror that the player experiences. Not to say that Casino Inc. is on the level of a Picasso or Resident Evil, only that its uniqueness isn't a reason to discount it. There are plenty of reasons to pick apart Casino Inc., but UI is such a small part of that, and way too much of a focus for the community at large. Casino Inc. is available on Steam. Some players report anti-piracy measures baked into the code. I didn't see this happen in my playthrough. They say this causes guests to come in and break machines, get drunk and throw up on the floor for doormen to not work properly. This is actually just how the game works. You can set your doorman and bouncers to kick out undesirable people. This should be the delicates who can't hold their liquor, the elderly, the poor trailer trash, teens, vacationers, and convention nerds. This may not be politically correct, but this is the game's logic. These people have too little money and way too many issues to be allowed into your establishment. The doormen are not perfect, however, even at high level, and sometimes it will be necessary for you to manually send a guard over to kick them out. It's not a toggle. Furthermore, your rivals are also coded to send folks over to your place with the express purpose to drink and cause havoc. There is also the contention that guests will come in and break your slot machines. This is also caused by the computer sending over guests to ruin your day, and has always been annoying since the game came out. I find it most useful to just not have have slots in my casino at all. By doing so, I was able to amass over $250,000 by hour 5. Some say that staff happiness will altogether tank at the same time, but again, this is baked into the functionality of the game. If one dealer is upset, either because of violent guest or being wrongly accused of cheating, he might talk to the other dealers at his table or on the same floor as him, relaying the message that they work for an unfair boss. To fix this, fire them as soon as you see a dip in their mood and hire more, as one bad apple will spoil the bunch, and it's best to cut out the rot and move forward with new hires. One of the brilliant things about Casino Inc. is it forces you to make these otherwise abhorrent choices and tricks you into embracing your inner capitalist. I think the issue that modern gamers run into in old games is there are a lot of functions happening under the surface they don't understand, and so they perceive that randomness as broken or unplayable. There are so many game functions that were stumbled upon accidentally. Someone had the intention of how a game would work, but the code had other ideas entirely, creating a new function that was then left in the game. Sometimes the game will lie to you, or an employee will make a mistake, and this will cost you hours of time and attention. That is how business management is in real life. And since this game is intended to be a management sim, I'd say it firmly hits the mark. From a power gaming perspective, it's best to mitigate these things if you want to win. If a dealer is accused of cheating, don't take them downstairs, fire them. This will have no impact on the staff and will correct the issue if it is occurring. Casino Inc. even accounts for noises and smells. If patrons don't like the smell of a burger while they play a round of baccarat, or to hear the sweet, sweet tunes flowing out of the disco, simply put up interior walls to separate those areas from your hand-wringing customers. Advertising is also essential, not just a box to check in a finely tuned UI. If you don't advertise, people will not come to your business. And ads only last 1 week, so you need to keep an eye on the calendar and be sure to rebuy the ad space before a competitor takes it from you. On your opposition. These are not just incompetent AI meant to fill up the screen and create a false sense of competition. These sharks are your enemy, and everything you do to ruin their business, they can do right back. They will send cheaters, they will send thugs, they will send every awful, disruptive customer they have up the street to you, and you should be actively doing the same to them. A high roller cheater is going to make more money for you than 4 table games combined, and he or she will add the benefit of making your competitor's life an absolute misery. The largest focus should be on picking your desired audience and making sure their needs are met. Socialites and high rollers desire high quality food and drinks, high level escorts, a dance floor playing smooth jazz, and table games. They are not fans of slots and burger joints or rubbing elbows with the riffraff. As soon as you find out who your target audience is and cater your casino to them, you'll have a much better experience playing the game. Neil Young once posited the question, is it better to burn out than to fade away? From an artistic perspective, I always tend to err on the side of burning out. Making one thing that even one person considers important or memorable is already cool, and Hothouse made at least 3 games that were enjoyed by an entire generation. The Gangsters series would be attempted many times to varying results, and I've never played a management sim that was quite like Casino Inc. These are the games I think of as a benchmark when playing newer entries in the genre. There are, unfortunately, not a lot of titles that can top their level of functionality and style. I've put a decent amount of playtime into Omerta City of Gangsters, and it's kind of like when you can't quite reach an itch you have in the middle of your back. Almost satisfying, yet ultimately it doesn't hit the spot you want it to. Empire of Sin was really great as a management title, but it suffered in bad turn-based combat and overly simplified systems. The management sim genre is seeing a renaissance from other studios, however, with Frontier Games making games like Planet Zoo and Planet Coaster, and the upcoming Sims-like titles sets to drop in the next couple years, which will focus on player agency and customization. Perhaps we just haven't arrived yet, and the next great gangster title is on the way. Until then, we have the memories of all the times up late at night pouring through these titles. As Henry Hill said, my whole life, all I wanted to be was a gangster. I am grateful that when my imagination was the most open at 10 to 12 years old, Hothouse gave me that opportunity. Maybe gaming has moved on. One day, I will too, and all the things I loved about games and how they were made will fall out of relevance, giving birth to a new style wholly detached from my preferences, but just as valuable. For those of us that were there, that saw the art and industry develop into what it is today, it's natural to lament the loss of something we can't even describe but feel so deeply. We only want others to experience these games how we did, so they can understand how we feel and how important the past was to us. Games are more than just a child's toy. They're part of our history and our identity, and they deserve to not only be remembered, but prized as the art they are.
We've certainly got them scared down there in New Temperance.
Well, what are you waiting for? This city is virgin territory, so get out there and take control. Do it your own way. But remember, real power is never given, it's taken.